All right. Good afternoon to Donna and to James. Thank you for joining me. My name is Krista McClure. I am the Director of Programs here at Arts Business Collaborative. We are based out of New York, but we are a national org. The intentionality behind our work is to uplift Black, Latinx, and Indigenous groups that are artists, that are focused on STEM, that are looking for access to network, knowledge, and resources. This conversation that we are having today is going to be centered around community-centric fundraising, which I'll get into a bit, but I certainly want to introduce the panelists. We have Donna and James, so I'll punt it over to Donna.
Hi. Yeah, like you said, I'm Donna James. I am a consultant and I work in spaces that are particularly invested in looking at the connectivity of their structures. One of the words that I like to use a lot is workflow design. Because I believe our workflows are actually informed by our relationships, and those relationships are 100% the pass or fail of your strategy. You can say that this is how we do our work as much as you want, but if in eventuality those people don't execute in those ways because they have disconnection or discomfort or tiptoe around each other, all these equitable aspirational frameworks fail. And so that's a lot of the work that I do, is really kind of poking at the people parts to kind of be like, where is the air coming out of this tire? Because we should be rolling.
Yeah, thank you for that. Definitely resonate. We'll have time to talk about that more. James.
I'm still reeling off Donna's intro. I took it in like a student. Thank you for that. James Feagin, managing partner of Black Bottom Ventures. We're an economic mobility firm. We help communities build wealth by empowering their citizens to participate in the innovation economy. Uh, I have had a host of uh, positions and roles over the last 15, 20 years or so, from grassroots economic development, community organizing, all the way up through managing investments for a family office. Um, and I really focus on building strategies for mission-driven organizations that help individuals achieve their dreams and goals, and building scale around.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to give context because this call is being recorded. We have James that's based here in Detroit. Donna, where are you located?
I'm in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, and I'm also in the Detroit area. So to give folks just context of where we're located, because we are a national organization, I'm rooted in Detroit. I wanted to be able to bring folks into these conversations from kind of my network in which I engage, and I'm very familiar with and versed with folks' work to be a part of this conversation. And really, this community-centric fundraising within the scope of ABC was really led by a phenomenal individual by the name of Erica Patterson. They took time to really do a deep dive. They built a network or consortium, if you will, of resource builders to be able to really understand the need from the artist lens and to kind of formulate some context so that way it can be applied whether you are an artist and or on the grassroots side, and or if you are in philanthropy and you're looking to understand more around kind of the accessibility inclusivity around community-centric fundraising. So I did want to give that little plug there. I think it's really important to attribute, despite the fact that that the research department has sunsetted, that there have been an abundance of folks over a period of time, again, Erica Patterson leading the way around this work. I also want to be able to uplift and acknowledge that community-centric fundraising is broad, right? It is about as broad as AI, in the sense that we have a general sense, an idea of maybe how it should move forward, but there's not actually like a template that exists, right? There's not a directive A to Z that is driving the message or the narrative of what that system should look like. So I want to certainly allow for those who are more well-versed, who are experts in this space, to speak more about this work. And Donna, I think you would probably be a really good starting point to just kind of offer an introduction to what community-centric fundraising is, but also I think a little bit about what we spoke about yesterday, kind of setting a tone for folks to make sure that anyone who's watching this and just kind of at a point in place of vulnerability to really, this may be a difficult conversation, so I'll let you set that tone.
Yeah. I think what is so interesting about this moment is we have a lot of language that is becoming very popular. And I think we've been through this before, but these are concepts that have existed for as long as humans have existed, right? Some of these sounds that we make out of our mouth, we just come up with terms to define something that is quite undefinable. And I think the thing that you said that really zings is that we are looking for like a standard and a map. And what is true of community-centric fundraising is there will never be a standard because each community is different. Each community's needs is different. And this is something that I think is really hard for a lot of our mindsets to grapple with, because especially in the cultures that we are steeped in, especially on this US land, there's this idea of some one right way of being, and people like us exist to shatter that mythology, right? People like us demonstrate that there is strength in diversity, and there's strength in our skill sets being diverse and our approaches being diverse, because the only thing that's true is change. The only thing that's natural is change. And like, you don't know what you're going to be dealing with. So why are you going to stack your deck with one set of tools, not knowing what's coming?
Yeah.
And so this whole concept is really about having an authentic and cohesive culture and understanding within a collective space. And that can be applied from fundraising all the way down to like social dynamics. It's so much about our connectivity and so much less about our bottom line.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Feagin?
I mean, I feel like I should just move on to the next question because she kind of broke it down. But what I would attempt to add is that, of the many layers of community-centric fundraising is, again, you both said a lot of great things, right? Kristen, you said how, sorry, Krista, you said how it's like AI, where it's not really defined. There's no specific roadmap. I think that is very important for people to understand and think about, because just like our work is fluid, and the funding landscape is fluid, like everything is fluid, and so there's some core undertone principles of that I think brings us together. And I think that's where we can start to think, right? It's about a group of people that are affected or disaffected disproportionately by a set of policies or actions or a relationship to capitalism. And folks like us, whether it's practitioners, um, individuals, concerned folks, organizational stewards, whatever, that say we need to do something, because if you just let this river keep flowing, it's going to flow a certain way and have a certain result. And so then it's about like what stick or rock or moat or pile of dirt or boat do you throw into that water to disrupt the thing that will happen uninterrupted. So I think that's enough of a common baseline that then what we're fundraising for and how we fundraise for it and from whom and to do exactly what will continue to morph over time. But the concept of the thing that binds us, which I think is an important foundation, is we are all somewhat displeased with the status quo and we're willing to do something about it. And so I think if we start there, then it creates the sharedness to then talk about some of the nuances and differences and maybe even competing or diverse styles at which we arrive at the solution, and even the different parts of what we're working on.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head by saying like we're displeased. Many persons of color are displeased with our current system, right? And I know that we kind of spoke about this briefly yesterday. right? Like having to fold into or mold to the constructs that are of these systems that are already designed, with the intentionality. Like, I think we know that there are program officers, for example, that are advocating on the behalf of their practitioners, their artists, their organizations, right, grassroots, or even, nonprofits themselves, right? How do we continue those that are on the ground level who are trying to disrupt the system, those that are even kind of a step above us who are also trying to help us be able to disrupt this system, get to that kind of board review or that committee that we know that that's where the power lives. And on the reversal, one of the questions that actually came out of the report, that our researcher Erica Patterson, or our past researcher Erica Patterson, had did really ask the question around how do we even get philanthropy to create and adhere to systems that don't force those that are on the ground to have to shift their mission, their values, their intentionality of the work that they really are rooted at wanting to do, because we're so consumed and caught up with chasing the dollar, because we live in this embodiment of this construct, right? Donna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I focus so much on like the personal relationship to this culture that we are all steeped in, because one of the things that I've seen in the spaces that I've worked in is our power, our individual power, we give away more often than it's taken. And I don't want to minimize or discount the reasons that we make those choices, right? The truth is we're a bunch of meat sacks with a lot of emotions running around the world, bouncing off of each other, right? Just a bunch of unhealed wounds and trauma, just bouncing off each other in conference rooms. And like, the thing we don't acknowledge is the emotional experience. And for me, anti-racism, inclusion, community-centric fundraising, all of these things are actually tied to people's emotional experience and what they're afraid of. And I think that often we in organizations continue that traditional white supremacy culture tactic of your personal, meaning your humanity, stays outside. And you can't have these conversations without that back at the table. And we can't have them until we're ready to deal with those. And that is hard, right? In spaces that have practiced pushing it down and away, how do you then have conversations with people who are not used to holding the depth of that weight? It can be really overwhelming. So I focus on growing people's emotional capacity, because for me, I don't see organizations, staff not knowing what they want to change. I see them not being empowered to make the changes and bravely face the consequences for aligning themselves closer to their values. I see people in positions of power who don't want to take that leap because they're afraid of what will happen if they do. What does it say about us? What if we fail? And to that, I say, are we not failing? Are we not failing right now? Right? Like, look at your org. What's your transition rate? I guarantee it's not great. Employee engagement is not good. And one of the things that was really interesting to me when I started getting involved more and more with CCF is somebody presented a question to me that was like, why do the resources often talk about how staff are treated or how staff feel? And I think that's really I didn't even think that, right? It didn't occur to me to wonder about that, because for me, it's innate that the internal health reflects the external outcome, right? If you have staff that don't feel empowered to say things to people who may be the decision of whether or not something gets funded, you're never going to have that conversation. And so that person is never going to learn. They're not a part of your community. You've set them up to be an outsider. And I don't actually think our donors or our funders want that experience either, but it's an incredibly human experience and phenomenon.
Yeah. That reminds me of last week's conversation. We did speak to kind of the idea that, right, like the funders, we know at the end of the day, have to clear a percentage of their revenue that they've generated based on interest that sits in the market, right? But that there's typically a disconnect. Everything is relational, and in a sense, whether, I think folks trying to typically think of like an entity that's an LLC or S corp is separate from that of like a 501c3. And there's some similarities and there's certainly certain differences between those two. But at the end of the day, like it is to me very relational in sense of business and having to like, in this case, right, from the philanthropic world, clear certain money so they're not therefore taxed on it. But how do we, I mean, like I really love and value justice funders out of California, that their work is focused on actually deliberately connecting with foundations, which they've got a list of them about like 10 or more, that they're working with foundations specifically to get them to clear their entire endowments that they have, right? With the idea that like if you're truly rooted with your mission and your vision to be able to tackle this work in alignment with these other organizations, this is the direction you're going. There's even an organization that I just discovered today out of Vancouver doing the same exact thing. They have made a very strong commitment that they were like, over the next 10 years, they were like, there's only 250 organizations that we're supporting over these next 10 years, where we plan to draw down our funds to the entirety to be able to support these organizations because of the close alignment with their work and that of what the foundation lives and breathes by. I don't know. James, I know, you spoke a little bit about kind of the work that you've done, and I know that I'm pretty well versed with the work that you've done as well. I'm curious, you mentioned a little bit yesterday, but right, like we know we live in this system. I think you were kind of hitting the nail on the head around this idea that we all come from a very compassionate place and space of what we feel and how we feel about our work as individuals, as artists, again, what have you. But that not everyone sees that alignment, not everyone sees the value. And I know I had then responded and said, like, what would it look like for there to be more of like this collaborative approach, right? Like where I understand like kind of my place, my zone, that maybe this isn't the peg that's fitting inside the square, but instead, like there's this network that I can pull from that it might be more fitting for them. Can you speak to some of the work that you've been a part of or have experienced where you understand that not every dollar is meant for you, right? Essentially, whoever that practitioner or partner is, and how do you leverage kind of the community so that that dollar or that funding goes to the appropriate and best fit, I guess, organization or practitioner?
Yeah, so I think it starts with the first thing is when you choose to like commit yourself to your causes, right? If it's social justice, if it's food, if it's housing, if it's environmental, whatever cause you're taking up. In my case, it's always been economic development and entrepreneurship, which all those things are a part of. You can't start a business if you're hungry. It's really damn hard if you're homeless. If you start a business, but you still can't buy a house because they're like you don't have W-2s, like the things are very interrelated. But whatever that thing is, when you're serious about that thing, your natural inclination is to get everybody to understand what the thing is, why it's important, and how they should feel about it. And there's nothing wrong with that to kind of evangelize the cause. Fundraising is different than evangelizing. And so I think one of the ways that we don't often separate that is we will go to the fundraising table and start evangelizing instead of having a strategy for dollar extraction.
Mm.
And so, there are people who have written 5, 6, 7-figure checks toward the goal that I wanted to achieve that may not understand or believe in what I've raised the money for. And some people can decide they're not okay with that. That it's got to be 100% mission aligned. Every dollar's got to be pure in intention and how it was gained and how it's deployed and do they fully understand it? You can do that, and there's nothing wrong with you setting that litmus. I would venture to say that a lot of folks that might even purport to be aligned, they may talk the language and may understand and may empathize and they'll show up to the panel discussion, they'll retweet you, they'll do all the different things. They might give you $5,000, but when you're trying to get $500,000, those checks are by and large with some folks that might have some different mindsets. And so the
Yeah.
question we ask ourselves is, at that point, is the priority is not saying priority to challenge anyone's priorities, but like, are we requiring the adoption of the belief, or are we
Mm,
strategizing around gaining the resources needed to fund the movement?
mm,
An individual question.
yeah. That was loaded. Donna, I feel like you've got that was loaded. Thanks.
It is loaded. I think that this is real, right? We can talk about it on this scale about philanthropy and organizations. We can also talk about it like a person, right? Like, who do you keep around you? Whose influence do you accept? Whose feedback do you honor, right?
Mm,
I think that's why it's so important for us to hold that individual empowerment, because, right, the way James moves in these spaces is inspiring, because you're able to look at what you're working with and do what you're there to do. Not everybody's in that space. Not
right.
everybody needs that in that moment. And I think it's really important for us, especially as workers and the working class right now, to think about what we need, think about where we're at. And I think that's why, for me, I am similarly passionate around like entrepreneurship, because even the language that we're using on this call, W-2s, LLCs, like there's a lot of, especially artists running around here going, what?
What? Mm-hmm.
And that's the game. That's the trap, right? It's all
Yeah.
this bureaucracy and paperwork that defines our way of living, when like, this paperwork, ultimately I can't eat this. And it's such a burden on people when we are already like paddling like ducks under the surface, right? All the time. So I think it's really important for us to share this information with each other, lean on each other, educate each other, and then give ourselves permission to like try out some stuff, because there isn't one right pathway for one artist or one org or one anything. It's going to be, what do you need? What's your goal in the moment? What are you working with? Right? Like, where are you in this moment? And what is your goal? And I think a lot of times we will sacrifice the goal of the moment for the eventual goal, being afraid that like, if we're not purists in that way, like Jane was saying, it will come back. And you don't even know who you're going to be then. You don't even know who you're going to be. So do the next right thing.
Yeah. You know, I want to kind of reel this back in. I mean, we are kind of using terms that are maybe more fluid, right? We're affluent to W-2 and to understanding the importance of an entity structure, filing taxes appropriately, so that we can, as James said, like, be able to purchase our new home. Don't buy our home right now. Okay, 8%, 7.5. Like, I'm telling you, please don't.
Don't
But
do it.
nonetheless,
You're about to have a whole different debate now.
but
Unless you need to do it now. We just said it.
Yeah.
What are you working with?
But to be able to, that's a privilege in itself, right? The ability to be able to be like, I have these tangible items to be able to take away with me so I can approach a bank to get a loan, right?
Yeah.
And so like thinking about it from the lens of an artist, which I've conveyed over and over. I don't know if I'd consider myself an artist. I think some people will be like, you have a creative, adaptive mind. Like, you're thinking like you are an artist. And I'm like, you'll get a stick figure from me. Like, that's the extent of what art you're going to get from me. But knowing artists and kind of like this, I would like to say like sensitive space that they're in, there's vulnerability, that they are very deeply passionate into like their work, right? And again, artists can be in the form of like an actual medium, right? Like maybe they're doing mural work. Maybe they are kind of doing footwork or hip hop, right? And maybe they're doing storytelling, right? Like there's a gamut, there's a spectrum of what that looks like. I'm just curious, as they're doing that work, how do they ensure that there's not this level of vulnerability that they're exposing so much that they are willing to exploit their talent, their work, in order to be able to secure the dollar? And with that, again, also understanding, how do they not shift necessarily who they are as an artist, right? And their work in their medium in order to change, to chase that dollar. So like one of the questions that came out of the report was really, again, like, how do we, as folks who sit at the table, who are engaged with foundations, again, Don, I know through your work, that's the work that you're doing. Feagin, you and I are enough spaces where I know that we're both making noise. How do we ensure that foundations or philanthropy are willing to create a more holistic approach to fundraising for those grassroots organizations, for those practitioners, those artists, so that they don't feel compelled on the ground level to continue to chase?
So I'll jump in here. I would first say, this is a good segue into artists. I had a couple examples I was going to think of. You know, when Dave Chappelle was given his interview after the whole Africa crackhead $50 million debacle, and it was him finally telling his story, which really, when you think back, was like, he's probably one of the first people to like fight back, and it was on the early stages of what we see now, where artists have their own platforms and you can't just leverage media to control narratives. And he said, you know, the one thing my father told me was name your price going in.
Mm.
And so I think before I get into any tactical tips of how to do whatever, everybody has your own thing. There are things that I'm very comfortable doing that someone else, particularly an artist, might not feel comfortable doing. Down to being invited somewhere to speak that has a dress code, and being told, if you're going to come in here and speak on this panel, this is what you got to put on. And I'll never forget watching, I'm throwing out names now, but it happened. We were at the Detroit Athletic Club, and Kresge brought in Theaster Gates to speak at the Detroit Athletic Club about the work that we were doing on Reimagine the Civic Commons. And I know Theaster. Theaster wears dashikis and whatever he wants to wear. And they were like, sir, we have a dress code. You need to put on a jacket and a shirt and a tie to come in. And he was like, well, y'all can cancel this shit.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he ended up on stage in his dashiki. Now, was that like a major, that wasn't Mandela serving 28 years. And also Theaster, accumulated enough power he can make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody has their own version of that, right? Like, do you not want to take meetings at 9 a.m. because you take your kids to school, and now this funder that you've been trying to get with for 6 months, it's like, I can meet you at 8:30 for coffee, but I have 20 minutes. You know what I mean? You might say, if this is my principle, this ain't it. Or you might say, hey, partner, somebody else, can you take my kids to school today, if that's what you have to do? Like, it could be that minor, or it could be as simple as like the installation or vision you want to create as a political message or swearing or whatever, and someone wants to review it before they fund it. So don't choke, because
I was like, you're speaking all the things.
so all of these are relative, right? And there's no right or wrong answer. You just have to be comfortable with your decision. And then we have to understand that, like, all power structures are not the same. Like, I went and worked for a family office there's times where I didn't do it, and there's people I didn't do it for. By the time I was able to go in, I had a very specific skill set, a set of relationships, and a value proposition. And I also knew I wasn't trying to retire from there. So I could come in on day one, and I wore my Jordans and my black t-shirt. And I didn't worry about who I was going to have lunch with or who I was doing this with or that with. Because I'm like, yo, I'm here for 2 or 3 years to disrupt this thing, set this thing up, and step out. Someone else who was more career-oriented might assimilate more, might make a different investment strategy, because it's a process of self-preservation. I don't judge that person. And I've even grown, because I realized, like, I need somebody to stay there, because I ain't going to stay there. And I'd rather have somebody that I can talk to that's not me, that I can still pick up the phone with, versus I leave and there's nobody there. So, like, even giving that person the space while they were there to function differently, because at the end of the day, going back to that river, right? They feel the same way about the river as I do. The fact that I'm putting boulders in it and they're taking the time to build a dam, like, doesn't change the fact that we both are just satisfied with how the river flows, and we want it to flow different.
Yeah. I think that I mean, I'd be curious, and I'm saying this carefully and without judgment, but I'm with you, Feagin. There's money I've left on the table. I know my mindset. I know my personality. Not everyone, I would say, has really worked the ladder to be able to get there. So when we're thinking about, I'll speak for myself. When I think about little old Krista, who was, 17, 18 years old, is different.
Baby Krista.
Yeah, different from this 35-year-old now, right? And like my approach to things, but how vulnerable I was, how unexperienced I was, how eager, right? Like I just was eager. I don't even know what I was doing back then, eager for something. That I wanted for folks to hear me, right? I wanted to be able to like center myself into a room where like folks, right, where like it was, what'd you say, evangelical? Like that was me at some point in time, right? Like that's been any one of us until we've hit, and I say the glass ceiling metaphorically because like at the end of the day, we know that persons of color never hit that glass ceiling metaphorically, right? But in my mind, I was like, I did at some point in time in my career. But what does it look like again for those artists, for those practitioners who some of them they do. We have a Bryce from Detroit is going to be on next week's panel discussion. Like I feel like in my lens, maybe in your lens, Feagin, like he's hit that glass ceiling. He might see himself very differently, and others might even see him differently, right? Like whether he's hit it or not. But again, like thinking of just like those very beginners, those folks who are just like, I've been doing this work since I was X years old, and now I'm starting to be able to engage funders. And yeah, I want to be able to carve out every bit of time. It was on one of the calls I remember sharing, like there were times when like I was worried about keeping the bills on at my building and not the bills on at my house. That's just how desperate, right? Like because I had this illusion of what it is that I wanted so badly. Now
Yeah.
I'm over like a different mindset. I'm like, oh no, everything external to these four walls of my household is not worth it, right? How do we shift that mindset? But again, how do we leverage the conversation? Many of us are in these rooms already. I know that we're doing it. We're talking to foundations. We're trying to get philanthropy, and they're easing up a bit, right? Like they're trying to create systems that allow for us to do an application that is recorded, or that allows us to just jump on a call with a program officer. And similarly with like reporting, like they just want to get on a call with us and like share back with them kind of a little bit about what happened. But some of those barriers or systems, uh, don't not everyone has the opportunity, right, to be able to speak, to be able to address, to be able to articulate in the way that is compelling to the funder. And so they're oftentimes kind of left out, right? They don't have that seat at the table. They don't have that opportunity to even have a chance to engage. And so I guess like when we think about either our younger selves or the folks that we know who are also in that same pattern where we've been at before, like what are we hopeful for now as we move forward? And where do we see within the foundation world, like what they're doing to accommodate, to make shifts on their side versus it always being on our end? Do we dress to assimilate? And yeah, I know the athletic, they sure do be on your head about what you can and cannot wear in there. Do we assimilate that? Or do we push our own narrative, right?
For me, assimilation is co-signment. And I think that's something really deep for us all to make the decision about, because I think everything we said is true, right? These decisions are made from a position of privilege a lot of the time, right? If you can decide to not take something, you won't need it probably as badly as somebody else might. And I think, but the thing that I want us to take away is that I think divestment is a more powerful tool than we're allowed to see. What I know of spaces that may not be as in alignment, may not be as aware of what it feels like to walk on this land in a different type of body and experience, they want to be appreciated too. Humans want to be appreciated. And I think sometimes our fear of all of the things that are super relevant gets in the way of us just showing our authentic response, which could create a change within them. Like we get in the way of our catalyst a lot of the time. The catalyst for change is allowing disruption, allowing dissonance, and allowing discomfort. And we don't allow those things most of the time. Most of the time we'll circumvent them, we'll get ahead of them. And I think a little bit what teaches the biggest lesson is when people's own engagement strategies fail, right? If you're like, we're doing all these things, it's not happening. Okay, then no one's sitting at your table.
Yeah.
That tells a more powerful story than anything. But we rarely let a table go empty, especially if there are resources there. And I do think there is something to be said about where we are at now. I feel people making decisions a little bit differently. There is a little bit more weight to our energy, our dignity, our silence, right? If I got to be silent at a table, I'm probably not sitting at that table post what we've all been through, right? There is a moment of like raw nerve happening now. And I think that that's a really important part of why we're even having this conversation, right? 5 years ago, we weren't having these types of conversations. And like, what will we talk about in 5 more years when more of us have the courage to not do certain things? And I do think that that is a personal decision, and I'm never going to shame anybody for how they shuck and jive through capitalism. I'm gonna be honest. Like I'm for it, but like, do it mindfully. Don't send your own body and mind the wrong signals, and know that this is a game we're playing. This is a game. This is not the world. This is a system and a board that was set up. Our world is real. What you feel is real. That's the most important thing. And I think the more that we allow what we're feeling to be shown, the more our narrative will be harder to erase. Does that make sense?
So
Yeah.
So Donna, there's so many things I want to respond to, but one of them is you touched on that 5-year question. And again, I love artists. I love nonprofit workers. I love everything. Part of the reason I work in entrepreneurship is from a pure capitalism scale, speed to wealth example. It's it's one of the things that gives us a chance that in 5 years, the people I'm working with are now the ones that we can either be complaining about or they're getting it right. Like you can launch a venture now and you're a billionaire in 5 years. And so now it's like, all right, what do you do with your family office? What do your policies look like? You know what I mean? So that's part of why I work in this space in the way that I do, because I'm not trying to be asking for shit 5 years from now. It's personal. You know what I mean? And
I mean,
so
it's past due, yes, to many folks. Yeah.
yeah. And so then the other part of that you talked about earlier, and again, I'm not trying to contradict you, but you mentioned Krista about the tables where power are at. Before we even get into unpacking that, just like there's another principle here that I kind of build with, right? Which is as long as I only define power by something I don't have, I'm always gonna be deficient. And so I've got to be able to define some power that's either something I got or something I can have access to, so that I'm not always asking, I'm not always depending. They don't always get to define what the terms are and what the tables are. So Donna, you talk about some powerful things. We talk about not being at the table or about being vocal about those things. And there are moments, and they're rare, and they're not always broadcast, and I have to fight for them every day in entrepreneurship and whatever else, where there's never going to be a moment where they actually say like, well, actually in this situation, you have the power. And so you got to define those moments and you got to leverage those moments, right? Because, and when we get tactical, there's different ways to do it, right? And this is the beauty of where an artist can create. They can control a press release, but like, what if an artist just put up a mural tomorrow that was like, here's everybody that's full of shit. You know what I mean? Like, this is being recorded, so I gotta calm down. But it's like sometimes we don't even think about like, like what are some of the tools that we actually do have that may not be budgets and press releases and program officers and narrative framing funding cycles and this and that, where it's like, like when we do say this can happen. And then also the other side of that is and this again, going back to what I learned from some of my engagement with other folks, it's what you're doing while you're also asking for the money has a big part to do with whether or not you actually get the money. Because there's nothing they hate more than something's popping and their leadership asks them about it or their board emails them about it and they're not a part of it.
Yeah.
So that's when I get back to that strategy for fundraising, like making your stuff pop makes you desirable. It also, as Fat Joe would say, yesterday's price is not today's price. It increases your ability to, number one, be self-sufficient. And then number two, when engage more on your terms than you might have otherwise if you were saying, like, I really want to do this thing, and if you give me some money, I'll start it. It's like, nah, this is happening anyway. I'm going to generate buzz on it anyway. It's going to be the dopest thing that happened. It might make sense for you to have this in your portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. You're on this bandwagon now, or are you going to watch it as it drives off? What are the odds?
Stop playing to the lens. Play. The lens will find you. Yeah. A lot of the artists that I spend a lot of my time with have a very hard time with like not playing to the lens, right? That there's this like mythology that lives in our mind of if I don't do all these things, I don't know, we're going to spontaneously combust. It's capitalism fear. I get it. I want to eat too. I love food. I love it. But similarly to James talking about the different types of power, like what about the different types of wealth, right? We're sort of taught to see ourselves through these lenses of things that are not innately part of our being and experience, right? And like I had to have I'll talk about me. I had real serious talks with myself during the last like 5 years. Like I've been stable. Why don't I feel stable? I've been housed. I am housed. Why don't I feel stable? Like, and I'll be honest, people that you have around you will help or hurt that mindset, right? I'm lucky I got people around me who have been unhoused. So when I get crazy because I can't go to brunch and I'm like, I'm broke, they look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah, you're humbled.
And that's helpful.
Yes.
You need people around you like that. It's very important, you know?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us are taught to not see that wealth, power. I'm going to use them the same way because I think that's what wealth is in this land. It's power, right? And like, you know, there's a lot of fear. We don't know what's going on. Our world is crazy. It spins on a dime. We all know it. We've all seen it. We all have PTSD from the last 5 years. Like it happened. We were there. So don't gaslight us that things can't change on a dime, right? But the thing that I keep trying to reinforce for myself, and I'm getting there, is like, I'm scared. Do you know how many people would have to be devastated for me to not be okay? I'm loved. I'm loved. I have a community around me. I invest in that community. So many people would have to lose their jobs and houses for me to be unhoused and unfed, right? And like, that is wealth too. And I think that's really important, right? James's career is made out of connection, right? My career is made out of connection.
Yeah.
This money didn't drop from the sky. We made it with our energy. And I think that that's really important, especially for artists and creatives to feel, because we feel the sensitivities, right? We take in a lot, but like push out more than you take in. Because like you're the source, especially as a creative, right? Like you are creating this universe that you want people to want to engage in. So be a big, booming, dynamic universe and just exist. That is revolutionary.
Yeah. I tell my son when he's bickering, he's a dually enrolled high school college student. So he'll from time to time be like, Mom, I can't. And I'm not the best parent, I will say. I have my moments where I'm just like, sink or swim, homie. But I'm very much like, are you one in a billion or are there a billion like you? And literally, like, I leave that as like the statement for him to digest every time. Finally, here he is in his like second year of college. He gets it. He doesn't keep asking me. He doesn't even make that complaint because he understands that you actually are okay compared to many others. But even compared to many others, like all is okay. We kind of keep saying we in this conversation, which I think is really important when we think about like artists. And I know I've like, my brain has been moving in this direction I know that in these conversations, I've been kind of trying to move the needle in this direction. But part of community-centric fundraising, I think, is also centered around, right, this notion of we and community and network and collaboration and connectivity. And I'm curious what either of you think about like cooperatives and how do they play a part? Are they helpful or harmful in changing the direction? We talk about what's happening in 5 years. I'm not sure if cooperatives will be what's happening in 5 years, but I wonder if in 10 years or if in 15 years, like that's where we'll start to see more of that change as we talk about we, because we are the people, right? We are the people, at least who look like us people, right? But like we're the ones who are kind of tired of like the systems and want to make that change, right? Like we're the ones who are displeased with that status quo. Sorry, I'm looking at my notebook where I wrote notes.
So I think there's cooperative the mindset and then there's cooperative legal structure. And I think that both will exist. Um I think it's, and we're getting a bit tactical, even though I know we're not gonna get super tactical. I think having more tools that we understand that allow for different types of structures, both in ownership and operation and economics, is good for us to understand them to make informed decisions. Because the one thing I will say is we are not going to non-profit our way to independence as a people. So it can't just be that. And just a couple of us getting rich and being off on our own ain't going to get it there either. So having structures that allow for us to even pilot and see like, hey, what is working best for us and put some data around that is helpful. I think, again, for me, even like I've been a founder, I've been a funding officer, I've been a grassroots operative. I think the cooperative mindset is critical. And I think, having again that shared vision that even if you are not in a formal cooperative, that you are able to function and leverage the concepts of economy of scale with people broader than yourself is really important. The oil cartel is not a cooperative, but they're able to say, like, listen, if I'm selling oil, you selling oil, we selling oil, we have a shared fate. Let's have a shared strategy. A chamber of commerce can look at a small business. Remember Oprah in the beef industry? Like, Oprah didn't get sued by one rancher. She got sued by beef.
Oh.
So when you think about, these structures like that, other cultures and other communities, other proponents and advanced users of capitalism know that these tools have value and power. So I think it's good for us to understand what tools can allow us to have more power. But whether we have the tool or not, two things are still true. Number one, we need to function a certain way. Number two, like, none of these different tools are going to change the need for having a sound economic strategy either way. Because whether you're getting your co-op funded, your nonprofit funded, revenue for your business, like, it's still the basic stuff, right? You got to eat, the business got to run, stuff has to get done, work has to get produced. Those four kind of fundamental activities are really going to be necessary, whatever your legal structure.
Yeah.
I feel like the structures are circumstantial. It's all how you use them, right? Just like technology, just like social media, just like all of these things. It's like, how are you using it? What's your impact? And I think that we often get a little bit stuck because of just the machine we live in. What's the 10 best? What are the top 10 strategies? What's the way? And like, often when I'm doing like intake with folks who are new to me, one of the things that I can see them trip over is like, I can't tell you until you tell me what your goal is and who you are. I don't even know how I'm going to help you until I know what holds you back. And I'll get there quickly. I don't need like an hour with you. I'll see it. But like,
yes,
it's you, whatever it is, it's you, it's us. And these structures, they evolve, they change, right? Just like the algorithms change. We find each other, we make things happen. And I think that stick-to-itiveness, that entrepreneurial awareness, that systemic education, Like without those things, you can be moving and doing everything right towards your goal, and you could trip on invisible lines you didn't see. And so I think just double back on what James keeps saying, this education and like getting on the same page with each other is so important. It's so important to like know what we all know in the same space. Otherwise, we don't know why are we going in that direction. And that will break apart your cohesive community culture faster than anything. Trust is the only thing that we have.
Well,
Yeah.
Donna, you said something. Oh, sorry, Krista, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
You said something really important that I don't want to skip over, which is somebody will come to you and they will want you to tell them what you can do for them before they even said who they are. Some of that is a subtle conditioning that we're so used to trying to find out how we need to dance to get whatever money we're in front of, that we're not even leading with conviction on our identity, because we don't want to like say we're this, but then they're only funding that. And so what we miss out on when we do that, beyond the just inherent trauma of behaving like that every day, is you lose the thing that actually makes you powerful in the long run. Like, let's not forget what fundraising is only a part of the strategy for you to do what it is that you're actually trying to do. And if you're actually trying to do that thing, it's not going to be 100% fundraisable, or it's not a real thing. So who are your patrons? Who is your community? Like, what is the practice and who is it valuable to? And like, the more you actually live authentically in that, like for the right funders, that's what will actually make you a good partner, because you being your most authentic self will attract the people that are for you. Like I say, be you looking for the people, so the people looking for you can find you. If somebody actually shows up and now you're 40% of yourself, you're not going to give off enough of the vibe to say, oh, this is what I was looking for, you know?
Yeah. I part of within Arts Business Collaborative, I have developed, we support artists through fiscal sponsorship. And through that, and in my time being here with the organization, I quickly discovered, I'm like, there needs to be some sort of like co-learning community or a fellowship, essentially, so that there's a cohesive network of folks who could be doing whatever, a myriad of different things, but like have the construct of the structures down, and understanding like the systems, right? But then also having like that network, that leverage of community and practice with you, stumbling over hurdles similar to you, and also like having that thought partner. There's this theory within fund development, and I say this from like my previous work, where you're either just chasing, in this case, it was 501c3 or 501c4 dollars. And I'm like, we can chase those two avenues, but there are other means in which any organization, I always say, I'm like, you should find 4 ways in which like you're generating revenue within your structure, whatever entity that looks like. So I'm like, if it's the 501c3, 501c4 that I'm chasing, we should also be looking at fiscal sponsorship. We should be securing funding through, in this case, like AARP, right? Like the federal funding that was being released during COVID, and building in partnership with other organizations who might be looking for us to serve as like vendors. And so within ABC, as I'm designing kind of like this fellowship cohort, I'm doing just that, right? With not having to necessarily secure the funding for these different avenues, but building out like, all right, we're going to leverage like this vendor who can help support with like, you know, this aspect of like this fellowship. And oh, we're going to actually partner with like these organizations that actually have access to stages across the states, so that our artists who are in our fellowship now have access to these states. Oh, there's this other organization that's looking at like a universal income for artists. Great. Like, I want to have a partnership with you. We have access to a space in like Brooklyn, so that we can actually have artists and residency and have a basic income. So like, I think anyone who is an artist or a creative probably has a far better visual mind than mine, but I'm like, you always have to be adaptive. And I always say, when I talk to small businesses or artists who are approaching and looking for fiscal sponsorship or just wanting to engage with Arts Business Collaborative, I always have to remind them, I'm like, when did you launch? Is it something that you just kind of curated during COVID or shortly thereafter? But I'm really deeply engaged in folks who like actually already had this vision, this mission since the beginning of COVID, and have been able to ride it and hold it through and be able to adapt and shift. If you've not been able to adapt and shift at that pivotal time, then I'm not sure if you yourself, Donna, as you said, you know immediately within an hour of someone's time, whether you have the passion, the drive to be able to move your work forward. I want to kind of close out this conversation with a really critical question. Again, this was, these were produced from out of the research that was compiled. What do we think, so we're talking a lot about like the artists, the practitioners, and like their approach from like their lens. And I'm kind of curious for any one of us who have been in the space of kind of foundation work and granting. I manage donor advised funds, so I have this lens as well too. How are we envisioning kind of the adaptation around like indicators, metrics, like assessments for those artists doing this work, right? Like how are we moving away from those practices that have been binding and restrictive that don't allow for the artists or the practitioners to be able to do that work on that ground? Like how are we shifting the narrative from that foundation lens? So I'll give an example. I reached out to United Way Southeast Michigan because I was trying to think of like a guideline for grant making through our donor advice fund, right? I'm like, there's got to be a template. Someone's got to have this out there somewhere. Lo and behold, everyone who I asked, they actually did not have a template. They have what they're looking for because, of course, they have that committee review that tells you like this is what you should be looking for, and who do you prioritize? But there wasn't actually like a flow chart. Like, all right, are you from within like these regions, right? And here's a tool that if you want to identify whether or not you're in those regions, like here's the census data for you to determine whether or not you're in like one of the most impact areas for XYZ. And so then they can kind of create the flow chart and they're like, yes or no. And if it's like, yes, great, you keep going. If it's no, then it's like, you're just not even eligible, not even going to waste your time, right? Like we have language around expectations or rules of eligibility, but we don't actually have this flow chart. And then within that flow chart, maybe it's not that it's a no, but maybe it's that on the back end, that system is telling us how we choose to prioritize who receives that funding. So if you go through this benchmark and you get all the way to like, yes, it's all applicable to you, maybe you move up into like the tier 1 priority. Similar, if you kind of make your way halfway through that list, you move over to tier 2. I was surprised there was not one foundation. And I think I asked at least 20 that had some sort of system like that.
Yeah, and as someone who's been in philanthropy, I can tell you why, or not why, but I can confirm that matrix does not exist. And it's because it's all subjective. I'm just trying to say this politely.
I was like, Feagin's trying to figure out the right word to use right now.
It's all subjective, and there's a lot of different reasons why different things happen. The other thing I would say is, and this is where I'll kind of flip this question, because if I'm going to leave us with something, I want to really leave us from an empowering place. The good part about, we can have a whole conversation about how I feel about the subjectivity of grant making. But the subjectivity means it is not hard and fast. And so the opportunity for us is to ask ourselves is, what do we think it should be? Because a lot of times we're asking people to fund us based on a criteria that was never created for us. So if I'm a muralist and the only thing your grant report is going to ask me is how many people saw the mural, is that really the true measure of impact of my art? So, and you, Mr. MBA student, public policy student, whatever, somebody's nephew, are you really the person to come up with the true way to measure the impact of me bearing my soul to the world? So what if we took that moment, that instance, that window of subjectivity and said, here's what I think would be a great way to measure the impact of my work. And I'm going to put this out there, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to adopt this as me as the pilot of how to fund me, show this, and then change the way that you do things going forward to have a more holistic way of looking at impact that aligns with the needs of artists like me and gives you as an organization something other than just another annual report with some numbers in it that don't really mean anything.
I like that. as feedback for me within this organization, the notion of allowing for the artists to be able to report back in a way that they see how that impact was made to their community versus us setting the expectation of what is the impact that we are looking for. The challenge with, at least in our organization, but even in some like foundation role, at least for those program officers, is that again, they're still having to report back to somebody else. So there is an interest because folks know with investment, there's time, and with time, there's numbers. So most people are very big on like, if I invest 100K, where's my return? And in this case, like, what's the return of that impact? Like, what are those numbers? Are you engaging 50 people? Are you engaging 50,000 people? Folks jump at numbers. They're excited. People like data. But that's only because that's been the status quo.
Right. And it's what people know how to do. And there's this whole adage around this is the way we've done things. And I'm not saying it'll happen overnight. I'm saying if we're expecting the outcomes to be different, it's not going to come from the people that don't have the incentive to make it different. We are the ones with the incentive to make it different. We are also the ones that really understand what our stuff means. I almost started cussing there. Like what our stuff really means. So if I tell you only 20 people saw my mural, but I'm able to use my phone now and do some storytelling with the 10 people and do a video on like, what does this painting mean to you? Or what did it inspire you to do? Those visual assets that then get posted on social media, you can tag the funder in them. You start to tell the story of inspiration and minds opening up. Now we're not getting off of just eyeballs. We're talking about like paradigm shifts that we can capture. And that doesn't take $100,000 to do. And it gives the funder some value on a way to see it. But more importantly, the activities that you should be engaging in to better support your fundraising should be the ones that actually just support your practice overall. So it's beneficial to you as an artist to find additional ways to connect with your audience. And if you do that in a true, authentic, impactful way, you're feeding yourself as an artist, you're feeding the impact of the audience, and then you're allowing the philanthropic partner, corporate partner, a window into that relationship. What you actually create for them, depending on who the partner is, because remember, we're talking about philanthropy, but this could also be corporate partners. You can only ask so many people, like, do you like Coke or Pepsi the best? But you can create a mural that has 2 paintings on either side and like a thing of paint and say, put your hand in this and slap it on which side you like best. And then it creates a visual representation of there's 5,000 hand slaps on the Coke slide and 2,000 on the Pepsi side. I'm just making shit up now as I go, and I'm cussing.
But that's what creativity is, right? Like, that's where I think I get frustrated with the data conversation because I went hard into data because that's the language that some people understand. And it's it's a powerful tool, right? So I feel like bringing a little creativity to data is really helpful, right? There's, not to Hamilton too hard, but like I wrote my way out, right? Write your way out. What did you do? If numbers are the thing, write it all down. Tell the whole story in numbers. These 10 people who saw the mural then talked to their ex-family members. They spent these many minutes together. Like, put as many numbers in there as you can. And like, there is something to that as well. I feel like using the whatever paints and colors you are handed and creating the most comprehensive picture of your worth, to James's point, is key. And like, none of that energy is ever wasted. That's where I kind of feel like these opportunities with grants and applications and things, they are all opportunities, right? Because you can turn that itself into another creative piece that you can then use to pump your own algorithm, right? And that, I feel like if we can do everything knowing that we have returns the same way power acts, right? What's your return? Only do those things and make sure that you get a return out of everything that your energy goes into. Don't do things because you feel like you have to. Do them for yourself. And like, it doesn't matter who it's ultimately for, as long as it's serving you, you'll feel good about what you've done and you will have something to carry yourself forward.
Yeah, I will admit, I'll be on the line if I had to slap my hand on either side because I'm like, it's either cherry Coke or cherry Pepsi for me. So I'm just going to be gray.
I'm a cherry girl too. Not interested. Give me something else. Put something else in it.
My creativity has stimulated conversation. I'm going to capture that in
Exactly.
my graphic report.
And there's two anecdotal examples right there that you could write into your report. They didn't want either. They didn't like either.
I inspired them to drive new brand concentration, blah, 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 right? Like, here you go.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been great. I've enjoyed this conversation. There's so much to unpack. There's so much more I'm sure that needs to be conveyed and talked about in this space around community-centric fundraising. Do either of you have any other thoughts or any closing statements or?
Yeah, my thoughts would just be the one thing that we didn't really do, and I'm sure you guys do it, is like, I don't have like, here's a list of resources you could call, or here's where the grants are. So I don't know if somebody came to us looking for that, but and I'm not that person for the arts, but I can say strategically, like, don't almost got like 7 rap lyrics and 3 cliches. And I was like, don't make the money, don't make the money make you. But like, it really is like true. Like, we get so caught up in the validation of this thing, right? And I'll leave it with music, right? For a while when I was coming, it was all about like getting signed, getting signed, getting signed. As an artist, very, very few artists that got signed are actually happy with the business deal that they came up with. And in today's market, you can book a show, put a thing on YouTube, go on SoundCloud, build a fan base, and make art completely uninterrupted in your little basement studio, and maybe be happier as an artist than you would if you were signed to the label. When the label comes, you get to negotiate your own terms. And so that's easier said than done. But to the point, like, if you're rapping every day, you're getting better as a rapper. If you're fundraising every day, you usually end up with a job as a consultant or a fundraiser. And you like, when's the last time I actually did art? So like, keep the main thing, and like, don't allow this thing and the people you're in front of to decide if your thing is valid, or the money to decide if it's valid. If you trust that pure place, you'll get the people you're supposed to get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually want to quote someone from the previous conversation. It was we were talking about artists and businesses and financial literacy, and they said, "Put you back in the seat of your life." I was like, and they're actually a rapper, so I was like, "That's fitting. That's fitting."
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you both again for taking the time out to partner with Arts Business Collaborative on this conversation around community-centric fundraising. Wish you both a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Peace.
Take care.
Bye.